And as he went by, he noticed that there was a note on it. It was all rolled up on it. So he grabbed this note, and opened it up, and it's kind of curious. You'd wonder, one, why a pump's out there, and two, there's a note. We got to read it, right? You find a note, you got to read it. And here's what it said. It's been out there for a while. It says, if you are reading this, I assume that you are interested in obtaining water from this pump. That's true. At the moment, this pump is not primed and will yield you no water. So, no matter how hard you pump that handle, no water will come. But do not fret. If you follow my exact directions and trust me, you will obtain an endless supply of water that will fill you until you can drink no more. That sounds wonderful to me. So please take note of the following. If you dig up directly down below the base of the pump, 1 foot, you'll find a glass jar of water. So this is where your imagination comes in. This is that pump I was talking about. So what down we found this. Ooh, look at that. I'm tempted. I'm tempted to open that up, take a drink right now. But let's continue with the note. There's a lot more to go, right? Oh, no. It says, do not drink this water. All right. I guess we could anyway. But either way, here's what it says. You must use every drop of water to prime the pump. Once you have dug up the bottle, remove the lid and pour exactly half of that water over the leather seal that connects the pump handle to the stem of the spout. Currently, this seal will not work because the sun has dried it out and it has shrunken. So, once you wet it again, it will swell and retain its seal. It will take exactly half of the water from the bottle, pour it on the leather for it to swell enough to work again. Well, we still got half. We can drink that, right? So next, pour the other half down the front of the spout of the pump to prime the underground well. This will provide the proper suction and will begin the process of drawing water once the handle is pumped. Again, do not drink the water in the bottle, but use it for this process. Once the water begins to flow again, drink until your heart is content. Then refill the bottle and bury it back in the sand for the next person to use when the time comes when they are thirsty. Do not be tempted to drink the limited amount of water in the bottle and exclude yourself and everyone else from the endless supply of water that could be yours if you follow these directions. And then it says, trust me. So what would you do? What would you do in that situation? Would you trust the writer of this note? I don't know who wrote it. Didn't even know the pump was there, right? Does the author of this letter even know what they're talking about? We have no idea. Do you follow the instructions and risk wasting the only water that we've seen for days? Remember, we've been out here trudging along for quite a while. So would you live for the here and the now? Or do you place your faith in a future that offers much, much more? That's questions we have and questions we got to ask ourselves. And the great thing about questions, and I say this a lot in youth group in the past, if you're going to ask a question, the idea is to get the answer, right? So we're going to jump into John chapter 4. We're going to be in verse 3. And we're going to kind of jump back in a way that's going to be kind of set up like Bible study is. So you get a good idea how that's going to go if you're there at those. So we're going to read verses 3 and 4, and it says this. He left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. So the road through Samaria was the shortest route from Jerusalem to Galilee. If you wanted to get there and get there quick, that's the way you go. The issue is, once again, it says that it goes through Samaria, right? Now, there was a deep, I should say distrust, or even maybe a hatred between the Jews and the Samaritans. And why, you ask? It's a wonderful question. Well, here's why. So when the Syrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, they exiled most of the Jewish people. They removed them from the land. And all that was left at that time were the lowest class of people. And that's who was there at that moment. 136 years later, the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom of Judah and followed a similar policy as the Assyrians did before. So you've got the lowest class now in all of the land of the northern and the southern kingdom. Now at this point, you had other non-Jewish people come in and intermarry with these, so now you've got the Samaritans. That's where they came from. It was a group of people that their faith was a combination of commands and rituals and also Moses' law. So it was kind of intermingled in all of it. So you had the Jewish people, that it was their land, they were taken out of it. Now you've got this group in there. So they didn't get along too well. Most Jews in Jesus' time despised the Samaritans, disliking probably even more than the Gentiles. Now, religiously speaking, they were considered half-breeds with a broad and a hybrid faith. The Samaritans built their own temple for worship on Mount Gerizim, but the Jews burned it around 128 BC. And as you can imagine, that didn't help the relations between the groups. Made it obviously a little bit worse. So we get back to the point. The text says Jesus needed to go through Samaria. Now, I'm sure it had nothing to do with travel time. He is not like, hey, guys, we need to cut a few days off this trip. He needed to go because there's people there that needed to hear what he had to say. 5 and 6, so he came to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near a plot of land that Jacob gave his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat by the well, and it was the 6th hour. The city of Sychar, that was the capital of the Samaritan region. So it was a long day of walking. After that long day of walking, Jesus was thirsty. Now, we understand that Jesus is fully God and he is fully man, but he did gave self-human limitations. So Jesus would become tired. He would become hungry. And at this point, he was thirsty. And we know it was around noon, so it was the day was hot. And Jesus was looking for a refreshing drink of water. And a woman of Samaria came and drew the water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples has gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink of me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Now the Samaritan woman came to the well at an unusual hour, and she was alone. Majority of the time, the women would come to the well early in the morning, and they would come in a group. So I guess we could think of two things could be the case. One, there was a sudden emergency water back home. We had to go get some. Most likely the case was she was probably a social outcast. Now the disciples had gone ahead to the city to get some food, so it's a good chance they might have passed her on the way. And it kind of makes you wonder how that interaction went. If they passed her on the way, how they felt about this Samaritan woman walking towards them. Did they scoot over out of the way, or did she have to stop and wait for them to go by? Some things you kind of wonder. So in tradition, a rabbi would not speak with a woman in public, not even his wife. It was also very unusual for a Jewish person to ask a favor of a Samaritan, let alone accept a drink from a Samaritan's cup. So we got all kinds, and we know just with what we've seen in Jesus' ministry, he has no issue with pushing boundaries. So he asked for this favor, and Jesus' request, I'm sure it completely surprised this woman. As we'll see later, the disciples were pretty surprised too that he was carrying this conversation with this Samaritan woman. Now, for many reasons, this woman would have been looked down upon by the religious leaders of Jesus' day. Once again, first off, she's a Samaritan. Second, she's a Samaritan woman. And third, she's a Samaritan woman with a questionable reputation. So for her to hear a kind greeting from a Jewish man would have been most unusual for sure. So generally speaking, Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. They kept their distance. Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Now, Jesus was talking about spiritual water here, water that satisfies not only the thirst, but it gives life, gives spiritual life. Now, she asked, "Are you greater than her father Jacob?" Now, without knowing the tone and how she said it, we don't know if that was a sincere question or if it was a sarcastic question. Now, by the way the conversation ends at the end of this story, I would say it was probably a honest question, because it looks to me like by the end of it, she is a believer in what Jesus says and who he says that he is. And Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I will give him becomes a fountain of water springing up with everlasting life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here and draw." So whoever drinks of this water from that well will thirst again. And Jesus understood that not only that woman, but all the women from that city came to that well every day. And every day they needed more, right? So he understood that. Now, Jesus used thirst as a picture of spiritual need. All of us at some point in our lives, I'm sure, have been thirsty. And if you get really thirsty, you can't wait to get that water, right? And you seek it out. You go try to find it. And that's what Jesus is getting at here, that spiritual need. It's something you seek, you find, you want to get a hold of. And Jesus said, "Whoever drinks the water that I give him will never thirst." Now, Jesus here made an amazing offer. To have water that you would never thirst again. What an amazing offer he made to this lady. He offered to this woman and anyone who would drink something that would give lasting satisfaction. The key is to drink of the water that Jesus offers. The water is offered of the world, and it won't do a whole lot of good, right? For a time. Things that we chase after for a time, that's good. But this lasting satisfaction. It's common for people to try to find satisfaction in their God-created inner thirst in many ways. We live in a country, we live in a state, we live in a county of people that are thirsty. They want, they long, they search, they reach, they try to find something for that thirst, but only that Jesus gives satisfies entirely. That's what they need. And that's what the Bible tells us, and once we get a hold of that's what we do, and you go and tell others around us that living water that they can have as well. Someone may say that I drank of what Jesus offered, and I feel thirsty and empty again. Well, a simple question is, drink again. Take another drink, right? It isn't one sip of Jesus that satisfies forever, but a continual connection with him. We've got to stay connected with who Jesus is. It's not just get a little bit and move on. Stay connected with who Jesus is. And we do that once again, attending church, studying our Bibles, time in prayer. The effect of the water does more than quench the thirst of the one who drinks it. It also creates something good. And we hear that word a lot, but genuinely good. Something life-giving in the heart of the one who drinks it. It becomes a fountain of water springing up with everlasting life. Now, the Samaritan woman's response was logical, but it wasn't necessarily spiritual. She said, "Yes, give me the water," but the idea was, I didn't want to be thirsty, and I really don't want to have to come back to this well every day. Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have well said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." Now, Jesus had strained cultural boundaries with this conversation already. And at this point, as the conversation continued, it would be appropriate for the woman's husband to be present. And also understand that Jesus knew that there was more to this woman's story than what she was letting on at this point. Now, she claimed she had no husband, which was technically true, and she was definitely surprised that Jesus had knowledge of her life. And through this she perceived that he must be a prophet. Our father worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Now, Jesus and the woman take a moment to speak and talk about worship. Now, the question she has, it could be a possible, they're talking about the location of worship. Is it Jerusalem? Is it Mount Gerizim? Where's this at? Where are we supposed to worship at? From what we understand, Moses says here. From what you understand, it goes here. And it could be an actual point of, confusion for her and the Samaritans. It's very possible. Or possibly, it could be a diversion from the conversation they were having prior concerning prior husbands and a current non-husband. So the Samaritans believed that Moses ordered an altar constructed on Mount Gerizim. This was their justification for worship on that mountain. This was their spot, their holy spot. Like all faith that combines elements of different religions, they worship what they do not know. They had so many things going on in their religion. They took some from here and some from here and other bits and pieces, and some just superstition. So if you sit and really you probably talked to 5 different Samaritans at the time, you'd probably get 5 different religions that they were following. Now, the Samaritans only accepted the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scripture, and they rejected the rest. They would have had the prophets, things like that at the time, which would tell about Messiah and the Jesus to come. Now, Jesus told her of a time when worship would no longer be focused on places. Neither Jerusalem nor Mount Gerizim, either one of them, had nothing to do with that. The finished work of Jesus would bring a greater spiritual worship. In fact, it says worship in spirit and in truth. To worship in spirit, you're concerned with spiritual reality, not just places and rituals. It's not where you're at. It's not the things you do to get there. It's the reality of who God is and who He is in your life, and you worship Him through there. Now, to worship in truth, you worship according to the whole teaching of the Scriptures, which would give them a bit of an issue because they just looked at the first 5, didn't go with any of the prophets they had. Now, of course, we're way better off than they are, right? We've got all of it. We've got the beginning to the end. So we worship according to the whole teaching of the Scriptures. It also means that we come to God in truth, not just a display of spirituality, not just what some people think it should be or what you think it should be. It's truth. Even though this woman was a sinner, Jesus revealed Himself to her, and Jesus reveals Himself to sinners. And I'm thankful that Jesus revealed Himself to me. Like I said, I went to church my whole life. September 22nd, 1977 was a Thursday. I don't know how quick they got out of the hospital then, but if it wasn't the next Sunday, it was probably going to be like the 3rd or something of October. But it was right after that, and it was always that way. And I'm thankful that my parents took, church attendance serious and what it meant, not just showing up and being there, but what it was all about and what they shared with me. And I remember we had there have been times growing up, when you grow up in the church, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, because as you grow up in the church, you kind of get an idea of what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to behave, and if so sometimes maybe it's bad, I don't know, maybe you can play the game a little bit. But I remember just through my years, there was times you'd go to the altar and times you'd pray and times you'd sit, and of course at Sylvania at the time we had old theater seats from the theater here in Bloomfield, but you just sit at your seat and you'd pray, and you'd feel you were growing closer. But there was a time I was 16 years old, and we had a revival meeting, went all week. John Coffey was the preacher, and all week he would preach and preach and preach, and on Monday, I felt it, it just, that God is, okay, Mike, it's time to get serious. You've dabbled here, it's time to get serious. Monday, and of course, an altar call, and you let it pass. Tuesday, you let it pass. Wednesday, you let it pass. Thursday, you let it pass. And by that time, your heart's a pounding. You know what you need to do. You need to go do some business with God and just, give some things away. And that Friday night, it was by the time the altar call came. By the time I stepped out, the time I went to the altar, it went from a rescue mission to just thank you. You know, it was just a fact of obedience, just a fact of stepping out and doing it. And it's just, I'm thankful for that. You know, the woman at the well, she didn't know Jesus, and neither did I. Now, once she did, she was changed forever, and so was I. And I'm thankful, so thankful for that. And at this point, the disciples came, and they marveled that he had talked with a woman, yet no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" The woman then left her water pot and went her way back into the city and said to them, "Come and see the man who told me all the things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" Then they all went out of the city and came to him. Now, the disciples were surprised that Jesus was talking to this woman, but they didn't question him. Through the time they've had with him, they've learned that he has reasons for his actions. There's reasons he does what he does, and they may not be obvious at the time. Sometimes in her life, we have faith. We believe that there's a reason for it, but it may not make a whole lot of sense at the time. But they trusted. So the woman left the conversation with Jesus and went back to the city. Now, Jesus so impressed the woman that she was compelled to tell those in the city they need to come to the well and meet Jesus. Jesus had such an impact, even though that he confronted her in her sin, the way she put it, all the things that I ever did, she had to tell people about this man that she had met. Now, even though they had treated her like an outcast before, she was a changed woman, and now she had to share the news with them. The woman's invitation was effective. The people came, and when she told them who Jesus was and how he impacted her in just that small conversation that they'd had. And many of the Samaritans of the city believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, "He told me all that I'd ever done." So when the Samaritans had come to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 more days. And many more believed because of his own word. Then they said to the woman, "Now we believe, not because of what you said, but we ourselves have heard him, and we know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world." The woman was amazed not only that Jesus knew all these facts of her life, like I said, everything that I've ever done, but that he loved her even knowing all the things that she'd ever done, all the facts of her life. We sometimes worry what happens if people would know all the things that we have done. They couldn't, they wouldn't, maybe they shouldn't love us, right? But we know that Jesus does. Most Jews on this road going through Samaria would have passed through really quickly. If it was necessary, we're going to get in, we're going to get out. We're going to go fast, right? If they were, I guess you'd say maybe stricter, or maybe a practicing Jew, I guess you'd say they wouldn't even go down that road. It's worth the extra time just to go around it. But here we have Jesus. He needed to go. There was a need to go. He not only went, he had a conversation with a woman that was, culturally, it shouldn't have ever happened. And not only did he do that, he stayed 2 extra days. In the days Jesus spent there, many more believed. The testimony of the woman connected the Samaritans to Jesus. Our testimony does the same thing, right? It connects people to Jesus. But it didn't stop there. They believed enough. They knew who she was, and they saw there was something different there. But they listened to him, and they came to a deeper personal faith in Jesus as both the Messiah, and they went a little further and said even the Savior of the world. I just think all of this because of a drink of water. Now, Jesus was thirsty physically. The woman, the city, they were thirsty spiritually. How's your thirst this morning? Now, before we do our communion, we'll go back to the questions we had earlier at the pump. Would you drink the water in hand and never find out if there was more to be had? Or would you live for the here and the now, or would you place your faith in a future that offers so much more? If we'd have those that were selected to pass out the elements for communion to come forward and go ahead and start that.